Please be seated. This has been an eventful week. One of the events that most people probably don't track as much as I do is that this has been the week of prayer for Christian unity. It begins on the 19th of January with the confession, the feast of the confession of St. Peter. That is the moment when Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Christ." And it ends today on the 26th with the conversion of St. Paul. That is the moment when he was on the road to Damascus and he was struck to the ground by a bright light and a voice that said, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And he turned around and stopped mistreating people who were simply believing in Jesus as the Christ, arresting them, rounding them up, and executing them, and became one of the greatest apostles and apologists for Jesus. Also, January 24th was 2 days ago, was the feast day of Florence Lee Tim Oy, a woman from Hong Kong, an Anglican in that diocese. And during World War II, when the Japanese were occupying Hong Kong and various parts of China and islands and such, she went behind enemy lines to minister to refugees, people who had to flee the Japanese occupation. And Anglican priests didn't have the permission to enter, so they were careful and didn't enter, so she did, and took care of them, brought them food, clothing, prayed for them, went back to her bishop in Hong Kong and said that they were asking for the sacraments, and he ordained her a priest. She's the first woman ordained in the Anglican communion to the priesthood. When the war ended, this courageous woman, the only one who had the courage to go behind enemy lines to take care of the refugees, was controversial throughout the world. The rest of the Anglican communion said, "What? A woman? That's not possible." So she surrendered her license, but she said, "I will not surrender my priestly orders." So in other words, she surrendered her permission to do priestly stuff in the Hong Kong area, but she said, "I'm still a priest." And then she emigrated in the 70s to Canada, where they had finally started to begin ordaining women there, and lived out the rest of her priestly ministry in Canada. The gospel message today and the message from Nehemiah are fascinating because both of them depict this. They depict worship. They depict people standing up to hear words being read and then somebody interpreting those words. And what's really remarkable in the gospel message is that we see Jesus going to church. It says, as was his custom. Jesus went to synagogue every Sabbath. Jesus was a student of the Hebrew Bible, and as we hear, he'd grown famous for going around teaching what we would call preaching in synagogues. So now we arrive at this moment in the synagogue today where he is. And they hand him the scroll of Isaiah. You can imagine these big papyrus scrolls, and then you unroll them to read them. Well, Isaiah is 66 chapters, something like 1,900 verses. And out of all of that text, Jesus goes and finds, because he knows it so well, the verses you heard today. It says, "And he said," and it says, "I have come to proclaim good news to the poor, release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of God's favor." Many people will interpret this passage about their own personal salvation because Jesus sits down and says, "This has been fulfilled in your hearing," as if, now I'm here, the thing is done. Well, that is one way to read it. And so for the Christians who read that, we can be in unity with them and say, yes, thank God Jesus has come to save us personally from our own personal sinfulness. But I tell you, when you talk to the majority of the world, when you talk to refugees, when you talk to people surviving war, when you talk to people who have had to flee from where they live, They will tell you that the God who saved them is the God who saved the Israelites as they escaped Egypt and wandered in the desert for 40 years. That's what that salvation means to them. Actually releasing physical captives, actually feeding and clothing the actual poor, not the spiritually poor, actually finding out who is the most oppressed in their society and doing something about it. And when Jesus says, this is fulfilled now in your hearing, I encourage you, whenever Jesus speaks about time, to remember that he has the mind of God. And time for God is very different from time for human beings. We experience time in a linear manner, the past, the present, the future, and we see it progressing in clock-like progression. To God, there is no category of time like ours. Everything is all time to God. So when Jesus says, this is fulfilled in your hearing, he means it was fulfilled 5,000 years ago, it's being fulfilled now, it's being fulfilled 5,000 years in the future. Looks like this is a moving sermon. So it doesn't mean I just said or done this one thing right now and some fulfillment has happened. It's ongoing work. Every commentator for this passage from Luke says, it's no mistake that Luke says Jesus picks out this particular passage to say, what is your job? What are the requirements of the gospel? To proclaim good news to the poor, to release the captives, to offer recovery of sight to the blind, to take care of those who are oppressed. The other really big thing in the news for people who aren't paying attention to the week of prayer for Christian unity are the immigration orders coming down from the administration. We've been here before. I've been here in San Diego before. And as some of you probably know, and some of you are upset about it, Bishop Buddy, who is the bishop of the Diocese of Washington, that is Washington, D.C., was in her cathedral seat at the National Cathedral, which is an Episcopal cathedral, for the National Prayer Service. It's pretty cool that people gather in a national house of prayer for something like that. And she preached to all of us about the need to be merciful and compassionate as God is merciful and compassionate. And then she spoke to the President of the United States and asked him to be merciful towards immigrants and merciful towards LGBTQ people in this country who are now living in fear and, can I say, terror. And she was excoriated. Some people in Congress want to censure her. I got to tell you that Congress can't censure a bishop. Bishops can censure a bishop, God can censure a bishop, but Congress can't. And really what she said in a very kind and gentle voice was, be merciful. Anything you and I might say to one another when there's tension in the room. The interesting thing is that her sermon was followed very rapidly by the presiding bishop of the United States, writing a letter in support of her words, urging the government to be merciful towards immigrants and LGBTQ people. Then it was followed by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the USCCB, if you come from Catholic land, who said the same thing in much harsher, sterner language, followed by the ELCA, that's the more liberal Lutherans, and the United Methodist Church, and I'm sure there are others, I just couldn't keep reading the news last night. In other words, a miracle occurred. We had a week of Christian unity on one issue, which is that we should not be treating people this way. So I want to bear witness to you because I have seen a lot in San Diego. And I have a lot of friends who are in a variety of statuses. They are DACA, meaning at some point when they were babies or little children, their parents brought them to the United States. They've lived in the United States. They're professors, they're priests, they're doctors, and they're terrified of getting deported. That's one simple example. More poignantly in 2017 is when, if you remember, we had a caravan of people coming across the border. These are not Mexicans. These are Haitians, Afghanis, Colombians, Nicaraguans, people from all different countries who are just using Mexico as an entry point because Mexico has a long history of providing loving, supporting care along all the way from the southern border all the way up to Tijuana and Ciudad de Juarez to offer people shelter along their way. And I became part of a group of people who were going to be on a rapid response team to show up for whatever people needed. I spoke at the time a little bit of Spanish, and I said, I don't know what I can do, but just tell me what to do. So I got a WhatsApp one night saying, people are being dropped by ICE and the Border Patrol at the Greyhound station in San Diego. People like to demonize ICE and Border Patrol, but I know people who work in those groups, and what they will tell you is that they are not prepared to be taking care of women and children and pregnant women and young men who haven't committed any crimes. They're looking for drug and arms and human traffickers. That's what they're looking for. That's what they're trying to prevent is crime. And instead, they'd see a woman in labor. They had no medical teams. They had cells is what they had. They didn't have blankets. They didn't have formula. They didn't have anything for children. And so they brought them to the bus station and called the churches and said, come help. One particular moment is just emblazoned in my memory. On one of those nights, we took people in a bus. We just got somebody to lend us a school bus. And we drove them to this really very small Catholic church that had a really small parish hall. I mean, the whole complex is 1/3 of this building itself. And we were just piling people in there and trying to take care of them. And then about 3 doors down, there was a priest house, kind of a small rectory that had a bathroom with a shower. And my job was to escort people to get showers. And 2 of the people I escorted were a young mother and her 4-year-old daughter, who was about this tall. That 4-year-old girl had very little clothing on her, and her entire body was covered with a red rash, a very itchy red rash. Her hair, kind of golden brown, was sticking out to here because it was matted. She had curly hair, and it was just sticking out from being matted. And she was very dirty. And I looked at her, and I was speaking as kindly as I could, and she looked at me with a look, kind of a combination of what I call desolation and anger. Why am I here, and why is this so bad? When you ask people their stories, and I do all the time, why did you come? Why did you cross? How did you cross? 95% of the time, the story is either extreme poverty or more likely extreme danger where they were. It's dangerous in parts of Colombia. It's dangerous in parts of Guatemala, in Nicaragua. There are gangs running these places. Their children being kidnapped. Their brother being murdered in the street in front of them. And so they fled for their lives. Or the other one that's very common is, my husband has been in San Jose, California for 10 years, and we've been waiting to try to get to them. Or my wife and children are in El Paso, and I just need to get to them. People are just trying to get united with a family that is already here. We offered people clothing, food, diapers. I just went out to the local 7-Eleven buying diapers and juice for the babies. And then we put them on buses. They had places to go, people they knew. That was 2017. And I want to make it perfectly clear, if people think that this is the partisan sermon that is about this party or that party, that every single presidential administration has had tremendous difficulty dealing with immigration. President Kennedy is the first one I know about who spoke about it, talking about how our immigration policy should be fair, it should be compassionate, and it should be enforceable. It's very difficult to do any of those three, and it has been for any president. The president who deported the most immigrants was President Barack Obama. It was George W. Bush who made DACA possible for a lot of people who had entered this country. So this is not partisan. It is a country struggling to find a way to be compassionate and merciful. Could it possibly be called compassionate and merciful to intentionally separate parents from their children? One of the things we did was to go to a federal prison in San Diego to protest outside just by yelling, by screaming, "Ah!" Because over the wall from us were parents of children who'd been taken away from them. And we knew those children would be taken, some to like camps, we'd call prison camps, some to houses, kind of being hidden in various houses owned by the county. And we just screamed because we wanted them to know we were there. And they screamed back, "Ah!" The presiding bishop, Catherine Jefferts Schori, was there. She was a retired bishop at the time. People ask me what we can do. I've had several of you come to me and say, "What are we going to do?" In my experience, you never know what's going to happen with this kind of work. And so what you have to do is keep your eyes and your ears open, pay attention, and when somebody says, "Can you help?" you say, "This is what I can do. I can drive someone to an airport. I can pay for some legal fees. I can watch this kid while you go do a job interview. I can get some clothing. I can find some diapers." We don't know what we're going to be asked to do. But what I do know is that it's hard work. It broke my heart about 50 times. And when I saw it coming again this time, I remember thinking, it's not my turn this time. I'm done. I'm tired. I'm going to get a puppy. Stay at home and hug my puppy. That's what I'm going to do. And guess what God said? It didn't sit well with me and God. And I was thinking about my broken heart. Hearts mend. Your heart has broken, right? Your heart has broken many times. And it heals. It heals with love. It heals with rest. It heals with care. But what is really unbearable is a heart of stone. The heart that says, I can't take this. I'm not going to do it. Or they never should have brought their kids across the border anyway if they didn't want to be separated from them. Where's the compassion? Where's the mercy? And so in the coming days, when you say, "I don't know what to do, I don't know how to help," what I suggest you do is you just look around and say, how can I show compassion and mercy to people on all sides of the question and the issue? But how can we, most of all, show compassion towards the most oppressed in our society? Because we are the ones who can make it the year of the Lord's favor for them. Amen.